Okay, so we are going to continue with the Proverbs. We are in chapter 9. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn out her 7 pillars. She has killed her beasts. She has mingled her wine. She has also furnished her table. She has sent forth her maidens. She crieth upon the highest places of the city. Whoso is simple, let him turn here. As for him that wanteth understanding, she says to him, Come, eat of my bread, and drink of the wine which I have mingled. Forsake the foolish and live, and go in the way of understanding. He that reproveth the scorner getteth to himself shame, and he that rebuketh a wicked man getteth himself a blot. Reprove not a scorner, lest he hate you. Rebuke a wise man, and he will love you. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will yet be wiser. Teach a just man, and he will increase in learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. For by me your days shall be multiplied, and the years of your life shall be increased. If you be wise, you shall be wise for yourself, but if you scornest, you shall bear it. A foolish woman is clamorous. She is simple, and knows nothing. For she sitteth at the door of her house, on a seat in the high places of the city, to call passengers who go right on their ways. Whoso is simple, let him turn here. And as for him that wanteth understanding, she says to him, Stolen waters are sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he knoweth not that the dead are there, and that her guests are in the depths of hell. So another chapter about wisdom. All of the chapters so far have been about wisdom, and we have been introduced to this principality, this celestial being that we can call wisdom, if I can say such a thing. It is seemingly obvious to me that this is a celestial force in the way that it is presented, as this being is personified by this woman that returns to us chapter after chapter. So starting with chapter 1, wisdom has built her house. She has hewn out her 7 pillars. So from this we have to integrate this illustration in our understanding of wisdom. Because often I think understanding the meaning of words can be quite a troublesome matter. Of course, we have the dictionary, we can look up words, but words are often a dynamic sort of thing. Their uses in different contexts have different flavors and have different magnitudes associated with them. And in the Proverbs here, it seems fairly obvious that wisdom is something that is quite a lofty word with quite a lofty meaning. It can be defined in rather simple terms, but also given its nature, it could be defined in quite elongated and prolonged illustrations. And so what we see here is an illustration. Again, we have this principality that is now personified in this woman. Now the woman is wisdom. And so wisdom, she has built her house. And she has cut her house out of her 7 pillars. So she has established a home. And so exactly what does it mean to establish a home? Well, it means to establish a place of stability. It is to establish a place of security. It is a place of, in some sense, abundance. But if abundance is going to be a part of our illustration, it's a rather small part of it, at least initially. Because we don't dwell just in abundance and consider this or the outcome of our labors and the abundance itself as the proof that wisdom exists or that we were wise in our decisions. The house and the home is a place of living. It is a place of rest. It is a place where the soul comes to be. It is the root of us. It is where we go after we have been in strange places for a sense of stability and, again, security. And these pillars represent that. It represents completeness. It represents the symbolic stability. It's comprehensive in its nature. And so we've seen, I think, this is my interpretation of it, a coalescing. It is the moving of something that was at once diffuse in the eyes of man, to something that is more principled, something that is more stable. Again, it has the pillars. It is fixed to the earth. It is fixed in such a way that it is knowable to our experience. And so this house, as it is used as an analogy that is very familiar to our experience, wisdom has taken root in our consciousness in this way. And so I think this is part of the reason why this verse is a beautiful verse. It goes on, of course, to get into the further unfolding of the household duties. It's as anybody can have a house, right? I've talked often about the difference between the house and the home, where the home is something that's more meaning-based. It's oriented towards the family and towards the building of love, we could say. Again, the expansion of the soul through the rooting in the home, the place that one goes to for security and comfort. In verse 2 it says, "She has killed her beasts. She has mingled her wine. She has also furnished her table." Now, mingle in this context means to mix together. And so, again, this is a further illustration of what is happening, keeping in mind that this is the way that wisdom is coming down to us. Wisdom is a principality. That means it's a celestial being that is higher up in the hierarchy than man. But it is coming down to us now in such a way, so far in the Proverbs, it has been warning us, it has been inviting us on in its way, it has been showing us different aspects, different paths. It's showing bits and pieces of itself. It has told us bits and pieces about its origin, when it walked with God, before the time of man, all this sort of thing. So again, we are orienting ourselves into this illustration of the house, into the home. She has killed her beasts. She has made this sacrifice for the house. She is preparing a meal. She's preparing to sustain her guests. She has also furnished her table. Again, another symbol of preparation. when your table is furnished. You are preparing to sit at the table. She has sent forth her maidens. She crieth upon the highest places of the city. So this is her invitation. She has sent forth her maidens to perhaps distribute this invitation to her house. And this invitation to the house is the invitation to wisdom. Whoso is simple, let him turn and hear. As for him that wanteth understanding, she says to him, Come, eat of my bread, and drink of my wine which I have mingled. Forsake the foolish and live, and go on in the way of understanding. Now this is something that has been continually repeated in the Proverbs. It is at once an invitation, but also a warning. She says, you can come have my food. It's for us, when we eat, it's something that sustains us. Without it we would die. It is a vital component of our life. It involves the maintenance of the body. It allows the various metabolic processes to occur, allows the cells to operate as they should, again, in order to sustain the body. And it's not just the body, it's the sustaining of the mind. And in the broader context, the invitation to the house is also an invitation to not just eating and that's sustaining, but also in terms of growth. Because as we sit at the table, we communicate with one another. And through this communication, we learn and we grow. And we do all of this within that place of stability. And so we can lower the barriers that we construct that as we are out in the wild, let's say, that when we are in a place that's away from the home, are necessary to keep us safe. It is no longer the walls of the house that are there to protect us. It is, as we are in the wild, up to us to be hypervigilant. And I think part of the home, part of its function, is to allow us to reduce those barriers. And the reduction of those barriers, I think, increases the permeability of the mind to accept certain things, to accept love, to accept other points of view, to accept rest, I suppose, to accept creativity, to accept purpose, and to accept meaning. And so we have our warning: forsake the foolish and live, and go in the way of understanding. Not to forsake something is to abandon something or someone. It is to leave it behind. It is to renounce it or to give it up. What we are giving up is our relationship to the foolish person. The foolish person is the person that lacks good sense of judgment, the person that is unwise. Not to lack good judgment is to give a poor account to what is true, to have a poor support for what one understands to be true, which means that they are likely to be false. Certainly more likely to be false than someone who has a strong account that they attach to their judgment. He that reproveth the scorner getteth to himself shame. Now this is an interesting statement. He that reproveth a scorner. Now when I think of this, the reproof of the scorner would have a positive consequence, at least at the surface of it. Because if you reprove the scorner, you are telling the individual that believes in this sense of worthlessness or despicability, this general air of contempt. We're saying that this is not correct, this is not right. To reprove is to reprimand. I suppose is to punish, so maybe it's not to say that it's not right per se. This, in a sense, can be seen as punishment, but perhaps not fully. But again, to reprove is to reprimand or censure. Not to reprimand someone is to express strong disapproval or criticism of someone, whether it be because of their behavior or their actions. So, and it is, in a way, it is this type of judgment or punishment. It is the punishment of shame, to a certain degree. It is to point out the aspects of the scorner that are deficient. Now, what's interesting about this is that the reproving of the scorner getteth to himself shame. Now, this matter of shame, I think, is interesting, because my initial inclination is to say that this shame has to do with the rightness or wrongness of one's action, that this shame comes from God. But I don't think that this shame is punishment from the divine order. I think this shame comes from the man's fellows. I think the shame comes from the opposition to that which is pointed out against the individual. I think shame to a certain degree begets shame. And what I mean by that is that if somebody is to call somebody else out for their scornful behavior, for their wickedness, often it is the case that if the individual that is being called out does not know the person very well that is doing the calling out or the pointing out of their misdeeds or misbehavior, there is a pushback. Who are you to say that I have committed a sin? Who are you to judge me? And I think it's not just the individual. Let's say there's a group of people around. It could be that all of the people, because of the harshness of that rebuke or that reproof, find a sense of injustice. That the man who has been living in a scornful manner, as he does, largely as he feels that he is, meaning that he goes about his days living and experiencing life as he perceives how he should, as his conception of himself. When something so contrary is pointed out, it is almost as if it is ripping that was something that we've talked about before, this ego. It is poking a hole in that balloon and deflating it. Now what happens, I think, is a part of the death of the self. Death of a part of the self, I should say. And these sorts of things are difficult to look at, I think, for us. Regardless of our resoluteness, I think we are all liable to being disturbed by certain facts of reality, and I think death is one of those things that is a bit disturbing to us. The finality of something that we once found valuable, the ending of something that at once seem to sustain us. It is a bit disturbing. Even things such as animals in the wild that attack and kill each other for their own food. Of course, we understand that this is necessary, but it can be quite disturbing when an animal comes upon another and rips a piece of it off, quite a substantial piece, and the animal is injured but still alive, and it could be alive for quite some time before it eventually perishes. And it is that image. It is the image of the disfigured and dismembered whole that, again, is something that was at once quite valuable, but now is rapidly coming to an end. This thing is held dear by many, and in the absence of wisdom, I would say, those around, and especially the individual of concern and of focus that is being rebuked, will have a negative, visceral response to it. And I think that that response is the thing that precipitates the shame of the individual that provided that rebuke in the first place. Now, shame is something that is a painful feeling of humiliation. And there's no shortage of things that I think humiliate us, or can potentially humiliate us. We can be going about our ways pretending and thinking that we are doing right, and then all of a sudden something severe turns its head at us, and we are confused. Why would something, if we are doing something right, then why would we receive a negative reaction or action? Well, the answer is quite obvious. There is wickedness that abounds everywhere. Again, that's a harsh thing to say because it is difficult to really determine these things. The process by which we have to go through is methodical. Often we are wrong. Often, perhaps our rebukes are wrong. And it's then that not only do we have to deal with the shame of being wrong, but we have to deal with the shame of being confronted by the individual that we have rebuked. It continues and it says, "And he that rebuketh a wicked man getteth himself a blot." Now, a blot is a stain. A stain is something that permeates something, and it provides us with the understanding that the event that occurred is always going to be known. It's a permanent, I want to say the word again, it's a stain. It is a spot. The spot has taken hold of the thing that has attempted to do a correction, has attempted to perform an action or to do a behavior. Now, often blots occur because of a mistake. Because we, if we think about it in our own everyday circumstances, if we are going to stain something, it's likely that we're eating carelessly, or we're not being as careful as we should be when we are handling paint, let's say, or ink, and it gets on our clothes or it gets on our hands and it stains us. And so this blot, I think, is the result of not being careful. And I think that this carefulness has to do and is bound up in love. For if somebody loves you and you love them, they're much more likely to be porous and accepting of critique and criticism. At the very least, they would be able, you would be able, I would be able to control the situation, to guide the situation in such a way that they would be trusting enough to follow with me and to hear and consider what I have to say. And I think that this would lead to certainly a less probability of the shame and of the blot. Because just like shame, the blot is something that stays with us. Humiliation is something that it's a rough thing to deal with. I know I think of things that I have done in my past, especially when I was younger, saying stupid things. And I look back on it and think, why would you have said something so stupid? And the reason that I remember it so strongly, and it still produces a visceral reaction, is because I was humiliated at the time. Verse 8 says, "Reprove not a scorner, lest he hate you. Rebuke a wise man, and he will love you." And so this seems to imply a quality of the wise person. The wise person always wants to know the truth, and so they will be accepting of the rebuke. If they're doing something wrong, they want to know what the right thing to do is. Whereas, again, the wicked or the scorner is somebody that either does not know, and when it is known, there is this defensive reaction, or they choose to live the way they want to live and they don't care much for the truth. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be yet wiser. Teach a just man, and he will increase in learning. So it's this receptibility, this willingness to listen and to change. And so I'd like for a moment to give a reflection here. I think this has to do with, certainly it has something to do with what we have been discussing thus far. I'm reminded of many occasions that I have attended a meal that is on a special occasion. Let's say Thanksgiving or a birthday, and this is in a home. It's not somewhere where I've gone out to eat. It is in a home. It is cooked by a person. Now, considering this person, we say that this person is wise. Why do we say that this person is wise? She takes the heavenly principle into account. What does that mean? She brings down an idea and endows a lesser material, a lesser substrate, with that heavenly principle to bring it up. And as she does so, it has this effect. It has a binding effect. It brings people together. It allows for mutual enjoyment. It produces conversation. We are all around the table and we all converse. Now, of course, there's much variability in the human experience, but by and large, this practice is something that brings people closer together. And so what we see here is this coalescing of thought, understanding, into something that is actionable in the world, something that does good. And just in this way, I imagine the principalities of heaven to work. The principalities being this celestial hierarchy. The things, perhaps we can think of it also as a Platonic form, the idea of wisdom, let's say, as it exists beyond man. It has its identity. It has its conception. It coalesces. It starts from a point, maybe, and it descends down to us. And just in the way as our cook brings her idea down and to raise the materials that she has brought together up for a greater purpose, a greater good, that of wisdom and her character do the same for us. Verse 10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. So remember from chapter 8, verse 13, the fear of the Lord is to hate evil. Well, there's something that could be said here. One has to wonder, why is the fear of the Lord to hate evil? I had a thought to myself as I was reading it the first time. I was trying to not get distracted by it so I could finish. But certainly I've heard the argument that evil would not exist without God. So what does that mean? Does that mean that there's a part of God that is evil? And I don't think that that is what it means. I think that as understanding, as light infiltrates the environment, the thing that causes the light, the thing that sets forth something that can grow and evolve, is not necessarily responsible for the thing that eventually comes to be of its own accord. And just as there are inferior celestial beings to that of the being that is, all that is, they have their own direction, their own way about them, just as we do. No doubt in the form that they have a certain character, which is why we can provide an identity to that of something that is evil or to that of something that is wisdom. And of course we've seen wisdom personified throughout the Proverbs. I think the same can be said of evil. Evil can be personified. And so why would it be the fear of the Lord to hate evil? To hate the principality that is evil? Pride and arrogancy, the evil way to purposefully and meaningfully tempt people away from that which is true, tempt people away from either moving towards or breaking away from either a more stable environment so that they can grow and love and whatever you want to call it, whatever comes with a strong, stable environment like this house of wisdom, or to break away from a place of stability that is slowly disrupting us, disrupting our character, polluting our soul, disrupting and tyrannizing our minds. The double-edged way of liberation or conservation, unity or disunity, both are principles of nature. Both have positive and negative. It is up to us to assign exactly what positive and what negative comes to each. And the evil assigns the negative purposefully to things that ought to be, I could just say ought to be. It is the purposeful assignment of things, purposeful assignment of the negative to things that ought to be. It is the purposeful destruction of that thing that ought to be. And it's a subtle matter because it's not just the purposeful destruction of some whole, because a destruction or a dissolution or a breaking apart of something may be necessary. It could very well be the case that evil puts something together that ought not to be. I think of a tyrant. And when I think of evil breaking something apart that ought to be together, I think of adultery. Of course, these are not the only examples, but the ones that most readily come to mind. And so again, let's return to the fear of the Lord. Now, this is something that I've proposed earlier in the Proverbs, but just as the Proverbs see fit to run over familiar ground more than once, perhaps for the purposes of solidification, perhaps for the purposes of increasing salience, whatever it might be, I think it's prudent to go over this as well. That is to say, this fear that we have, something that is certainly reasonable, a concern about what lies beyond our known sphere, specifically when it comes to things which are potentially dangerous, the consequences for which we can't necessarily see. Sometimes things, the chain of events are so long that it's difficult to predict exactly what the outcome of a certain behavior or action is. And there is a certain fear in that. There's a certain fear in humility, in the sense of us admitting and understanding that we don't know everything. Fear is certainly an unpleasant emotion. Now, by the definition, it is caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous. It's a threat. And so what I'm saying here is that we fear, it is reasonable to fear this thing. I think often it goes under our radar. And many of us have lead different lives, different ways of approaching this. Some of us are more attentive to these matters than others. But regardless of the state or the condition of a particular person, or the willfulness of a particular person, I think that, in the first place, the apprehension of that which is unknown is warranted, but as it, as I say, moves underneath what we can see, it crosses our barriers, our walls, and into our hearts and into our soul, unbeknownst to us. What we should fear is that which attempts to come and take it from us. We fear this because we don't understand how it has infiltrated us. We don't understand the damage that it has done. We don't understand the degree to which it has become a part of us. And I've said before that the excision of anything is quite painful. I mentioned before the analogy to the dismemberment of an animal. How disturbing that is, and how that relates to shame, how that relates to the verse of, "He that reproveth the scorner getteth to himself shame, and he that rebuketh the wicked man getteth himself a blot. In a similar manner, this happens to us on the level of the individual and our relationship to that which is God, the highest in the celestial hierarchy. This is the thing that takes from us ourselves, at least our conception of it. And within the lack of wisdom, or just being a human being and not understanding everything, we are susceptible to this type of judgment. And I think it is reasonable for one to say that this can cause an unpleasant emotion, caused by the belief that something is dangerous, the fear of evil, or the fear of judgment, and thereby the hatred of evil. Now, the wise person, I would have to question. I would have to think, if someone is wise, would they truly fear this judgment? Perhaps no one is quite ready for the level, and it's within the severity of this and the unexpectedness that it takes everybody off guard. But I think it does also stand to reason that the better off we are in terms of integrating ourselves into the house of our woman of question, into this wisdom, then the impact of which surely would be less. But the awareness and the desire to avoid this unpleasant emotion is the beginning of wisdom. And the knowledge of the holy is understanding. The holy is a formal declaration of the way of things. It is a pillar planted firmly within the earth that says what is right and what is wrong. It's hallowed because it is. There's no falsehood in it. And knowing such a thing is understanding. It is to stand atop of that which, to many of us, to our blank condition lies beneath. And when I mean blank condition, I mean just right after birth, without any additional information or input. We are a blank slate. To understand is to understand that which is beneath the surface, that is covered, that is not necessarily readily known to the conscious mind, beautiful as though it may be. For by me your days shall be multiplied, and the years of your life shall be increased. If you be wise, you shall be wise for yourself. But if you scornest, you alone shall bear it. I've said this before, but this is something that I'm guilty of. The guilt of bearing the scorn, this contempt, this unavoidable despair, the feelings of worthlessness, disdain for something, disdain for myself. Again, like many things, there's heaven and hell that permeates our experience. Disdain for the self can be hell, but it could also be to the pursuit of heaven, I think. That one disdains oneself is to find the bits and pieces of the self that have been permeated by this evil. It is to listen, in some sense, to the wisdom of all that is. The wisdom of God, the wisdom of the way of things, the wisdom of the way things ought to be. On the other hand, there is this opinion by the self of worthlessness of others, of their pursuits, that they believe that their purpose here is much greater than what they have currently. Not necessarily bad on its face, but if it proves to be a philosophy that orients one downwards into the pit, then surely it is a bad thing. As a motivating principle, I think that we should all strive towards things that are greater. But through worthlessness and contempt, to believe and to feel disdain, I think this is not the way to go. We can strive for higher things while feeling for the higher things. While feeling, instead of disdain and contempt, glory and wonder at what can be, rather than, again, the negativity at what is. A foolish woman is clamorous. She is simple, and she knows nothing. So this clamorousness, it's a loudness. It is a unthoughtfulness, perhaps. It's an anxiety, it's an uncontrolled anxiety. It's a perversion away from attentiveness and focus. That loudness, I think, that clamorousness, is an attempt to block what needs to be heard. It's not necessarily, it's possible that it is doing two things, one positive and one negative. It is blocking the scorn, again, that contempt and derision for the self, but it is also blocking that which understands the problem, but also values the solution. And so for fear of judgment by God and the way that we would receive it, we pursue that which is evil. And in this case, evil is more subtle. It's not explicit. It is the gradual erosion of the attention. And it remains so that one is simple and knows nothing. For she sitteth at the door of her house, on a seat in the high places of the city, to call passengers who go right on their ways. Whoso is simple, let him turn and hear. And as for him that wanteth understanding, she says to him, stolen waters are sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he knows not that the dead are there, and that her guests are in the depths of hell. They are beyond the mind that is welcomed by the angel of wisdom, we could say, by her that has produced this house, that has attempted to invite us into. And there is a clear parallel here. Now there's two images. There's one image of the woman that is the personification of the celestial principality. In this symbol, it's often the case that she is sitting above, or she's at the entrance of the gates. She's always this intercepting force. Now she's high up. She's at the heights of the city, so that when she says something, all may hear. She's at the entrance of the gates, so that she may intercept anyone who comes or goes. And just in the like manner, in the opposite view, you have this woman who is of the opposite, essentially. That is away from wisdom, that is away from understanding, that is away from the righteous stability, and attempts to congregate people to her in such a way that perverts their attention, perhaps their values. She tempts them not to listen. She says that you should not fear the Lord, and thereby not listen, thereby not know the holy, thereby not understand. So in the verse 17 here, the second to last, stolen waters are sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. Now, of course, this seems fairly obvious, that when something is stolen, it is contrary to the law. It is contrary to the law because it ignores who owns what. It ignores the bonds that are created between individual property. But this can extend into all sorts of different realms and all sorts of different ways. But to say that stolen waters are sweet is to put value where value should not be. It is to darken instead of to brighten. And bread eaten in secret is pleasant. There are many different interpretations here, but going off of our earlier example of the principality of wisdom setting up her home in an inviting manner, preparing the table, this attempts to do the opposite. It's an invitation to eat alone, not to share, not to learn, to stay ignorant, to stay dull. And so that concludes chapter 9. Chapter 10. The Proverbs of Solomon. A wise son maketh a glad father, but a foolish son is the heaviness of his mother. Treasures of wickedness profit nothing, but righteousness delivereth from death. The Lord will not suffer the soul of the righteous to famish, but he casteth away the substance of the wicked. He becometh poor that dealeth with a slack hand, but the hand of the diligent maketh rich. He that gathereth in the summer is a wise son, but he that sleepeth in harvest is a son that causeth shame. Blessings are upon the head of the just, but violence covers the mouth of the wicked. The memory of the just is blessed, but the name of the wicked shall rot. The wise in heart will receive commandments, but a prating fool shall fall. He that walketh uprightly walketh surely, but he that perverteth his ways shall be known. He that winketh with the eye causeth sorrow, but a prating fool shall fall. The mouth of a righteous man is a well of life, but violence covereth the mouth of the wicked. Hatred stirreth up strifes, but love covereth all sins. In the lips of him that has understanding, wisdom is found. But a rod is for the back of him that is void of understanding. Wise men lay up knowledge, but the mouth of the foolish is near destruction. The rich man's wealth is his strong city. The destruction of the poor is their poverty. The labor of the righteous tendeth to life, the fruit of the wicked to sin. He is in the way of life that keepeth instruction, but he that refuseth reproof erreth. He that hides hatred with lying lips, and he that utters a slander is a fool. In the multitude of words there wants not sin, but he that refrains his lips is wise. The tongue of the just is as choice silver, the heart of the wicked is little worth. The lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for want of wisdom. The blessing of the Lord, it maketh rich, and he adds no sorrow with it. It is as sport to fool to do mischief, but a man of understanding has wisdom. The fear of the wicked, it shall come upon him, but the desire of the righteous shall be granted. As the whirlwind passes, so is the wicked no more, but the righteous is an everlasting foundation. As vinegar to the teeth, and as smoke to the eyes, so is the sluggard to them that send him. The fear of the Lord prolongeth days, but the years of the wicked shall be shortened. The hope of the righteous shall be gladness, but the expectation of the wicked shall perish. The way of the Lord is strength to the upright, but destruction shall be to the workers of iniquity. The righteous shall never be removed, but the wicked shall not inhabit the earth. The mouth of just bringeth forth wisdom, but the forward tongue shall be cut out. The lips of the righteous know what is acceptable, but the mouth of the wicked speak frowardness. Okay, so initial impressions here. I think we see a lot of contrast between the good and of the evil, or the insufficient, quite frankly. A lot of verses are this contrast between the righteous shall receive this, while the wicked shall receive this. Along with this, I think we have a bit of a cryptic introduction, perhaps not an introduction, but a slow seepage of the way of how the divine operates in our world. And I think one of the goals for this chapter is going to be to determine in a reasonable manner how it is that the righteous prosper while the wicked decay and go down to the pit. For it's one thing to have a top-down decree in which any old king can provide for his citizens, and the citizens can surely obey that decree. But the sophisticated populace will want to understand why it is that they are following the decree that they are following. Not that they don't want to follow it, but rather they want to make sure that what they are following is actually right, what they are following is actually just. So let's begin here, verse by verse. So we're introduced by The sentence here, the Proverbs of Solomon. Solomon, the son of David. David, the second king of Israel after Saul. He was beloved in the eyes of God, despite that God not wanting a king to rule over Israel. Exactly what that means is difficult to say, really, but probably through a lot of known experience of the world at that time, the kingship brought with it a lot of negative consequences. With the kingship, there is always the risk of tyranny and abuse of power. It is very centralized in terms of its power structure. I think the authority, if not properly distributed or in its proper place, can lead to things like divination of the king. You see that a lot in the ancient world, where there is a divine right to rule. You see it in Egypt, you see it in Sumeria, Mesopotamia rather, I should say. You see it in many places. You see a lack of accountability. Often in the historical books of the Bible, you see just this undulating trajectory and history of kings that did not follow in the ways of God. They constructed false idols, and then every once in a while you would get someone that learned from the mistakes of the king, perhaps a few generations of kings, and they would destroy the altars. They would make the necessary corrections to set Israel on the right path, and then you'd have their son or some relation take up through succession, hereditary succession, they would take up the mantle, and often it would just go right back to hell again. A wise son makes a glad father. Of course, this is relatively straightforward. But this applies not only to the individual, but also to the relationship between the human being and that of the divine logos, of all that is. And the wise and prudent son is somebody that can properly order their affairs in such a way to lift the burdens and the responsibility of rearing the child from the parents, so that they may continue with their lives. But not only that, it is to come full circle. It is to contribute to perhaps what the family has built, to continue it and to sustain it, to grow it. But a foolish son is the heaviness of his mother. Now, a heaviness is something that weighs us down. It weighs us down in such a way that encumbers our movement. It makes it much more difficult for us to ascend or to move between point A and point B. The son is a burden to bear because of the lack of proper judgment on the part of the son. There is a stagnation of his movement. And this stagnation increases the burden of responsibility on those that have attempted to raise him and move him out into the world. Treasures of wickedness profit nothing, but righteousness delivereth from death. So we see many of these types of verses in this chapter. And I think at first glance they can seem somewhat superficial. Or rather, maybe I should say it's obvious. Well, of course the treasures of the wickedness profit nothing. But I think it is a useful exercise to give reason to why that is. So to say treasures of wickedness profit nothing is an interesting statement. Because you're saying treasures, which is something that many people find to be valuable, but it's only valuable to those of the wicked. And if we have something that is valuable to the wicked, it is not necessarily going to be valuable to those who are righteous. And so when the wicked profit, the righteous do not. Now what can we say of the wicked, just so that we can get a grasp of exactly what this is in comparison to the righteous life, and what the righteous treasures might be? The wicked are the evil, or the morally corrupt, the unpleasant, the wrongful, bad, sinful, all of these words. Now these words have a further root. This evil, this wrong, badness, immoral. They're connected to the substrate by truth and misplaced truth. We have spoken at length about the fear of the Lord is to hate evil. To hate evil is to hate falsehood. It's to hate willing falsehood. And the fear is the recognition that we don't know everything, and that even through the most subtle of means, even under the guise of the good, of the righteous, this evil can permeate into our being. And that should cause fear, because it can confuse us and corrupt us in such a way that when judgment comes, it'll be quite painful to separate from. That's sort of the Cliff Note version of what we had said earlier in chapter 9. And so the treasures of the wickedness, of wicked people. This might be power. This might be what we were talking about of the tyrannical king. It might be the individual, just as the king, that feels that what they are doing is right. Perhaps they are levying a tax for a certain public work that really only serves the decadence of the upperclassmen, let's say, rather than uplifting the poor. And I think therein lies another potential danger. For to say the uplifting of the poor, we often think about, even in the modern day context, we think about providing the poor with things that we consider to be valuable to many of us, which is material goods or money, rather than opportunity. Because opportunity involves the growth of the mind and of capability and of access. That of the former involves my mind goes to drugs, my mind goes to quick fixes. Not to say that the money would be used for drugs, although that's highly probable, given many of the poor in our modern day circumstance. But rather the money itself is a drug. Because it is in the poor state, when man has There's another, I think, important distinction about what it means to be poor. I think true poverty has to do with poverty of mind, again, poverty of ability. I think all of these things lead to the poverty of material circumstance. And I think that it's easy to confuse exactly where the intervention should be. In my estimation, it should always be at the root. If we are unable to find the root, or if we are unwilling to identify exactly what it is, then that is a form of evil, I think. It's a perversion of the truth. You can't domesticate an animal through the constant diversion of its attention, allowing it to do as it pleases. The process of growth, and to stay consistent with our analogy that of domestication, is through properly placed incentives and continual discipline and correction when there is a wrong, so that one learns. And I think over time, poverty of mind decreases and capability increases. For the poor of mind learn the ways of the righteous. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that when this problem is corrected, that the material circumstance will improve. And I think that there is types of charity that may be necessary in those circumstances. The second part of this verse, but righteousness delivereth from death. It's quite a long line to follow there. Because what we were talking about with poverty, we weren't necessarily talking about the consequence of death, what exactly that means, how that can take place. But the end of this verse would seem to suggest that there is a sort of death that is involved with wickedness, whether it be the physical death or that of the level of understanding of the conscious mind. Now, I think these levels are aided by the various principalities or celestial beings that permeate our intelligible sphere. And when we knock ourselves back down a level for whatever reason, whether it be because we were not attentive during the sowing of our crop and our harvest was insufficient and led to a famine, more of an ancient example. More of the modern day situation would be the gradual erosion and inattentiveness to our education and civic duties that have led to a poor understanding of the way of things, the structure of our society, and the responsibilities of the citizens therein. And it has failed to prevent a massive bureaucracy from taking root and corrupting the minds and deceiving the people from their ends, which are inherently wicked ends if they are using deception. And again, this deception and gradual corruption and poverty of mind is the thing that can lead to the death in that sense. It is the end. Perhaps it's an end of an era. It's the end of a golden age. It is an era of less contemplation, of less wonder, of less drive. And so in this way we see death as outside of the literal meaning and inside of the symbolic. In this case specifically, we were talking about transition and change. And in the context of the righteous, as the second part of this verse says, but the righteous delivereth from death. If we are to expand death into this large expanse that has many different meanings, beyond just the literal, but also can include the literal, we can see that from the transition and change, when we enter into the darkness, what I was talking about this, the end of an era, what leads us into the next, the brightness of a new age, is the behavior of the righteous. It is those that lead and point to the things that we ought to orient the attention to. And it's just the rightness of the ought that is the thing that leads to our deliverance. Another way that we could think of death is the loss of hope, the loss of faith. All of our dreams, our desires for relationships and ideals, everything becomes this sort of, whether it be on the individual level or the collective level, it becomes this gloomy thing. I think vaguely of that of Russian culture coming out of the Soviet era, certainly within the Soviet era, and all the problems that there are with alcoholism and the year after year of finding little to no opportunity. And I think even more is true of the ex-Soviet satellites than it is of the heart of Russia, but of course that's just one example. There are many. Our aspirations and expectations have been shattered. And we experience a sense of loss, just as if somebody that we know close to us had died, in the literal sense. And there's a need to let go of it. But if we have no hope, then there's nothing else to hope for or to grab onto. But it's, again, through the righteousness that delivers us from this pit. Death, again, along with what we've been talking about, is the ending of something and the beginning of something new. It is possible for transcendence to occur. The ending of one level, one plane of consciousness up to the next, or perhaps down to the next. But of course, since we're talking about the righteous, if the righteous is truly to deliver, then we are delivered from the negative. The Lord will not suffer the soul of the righteous to famish, but he casteth away the substance of the wicked. Now this is a tough one, because surely there are people that may be considered righteous that suffer. And so how can we square this with the suffering of the wicked? Especially given all of the suffering that there is. How do we understand the relationship between individual suffering and more of the collective types of suffering. The evil that takes root in a society that leads to the suffering of the individual. And how is it exactly that we can understand the way of the Lord in this environment? Sometimes I listen to these podcasts. A lot of these ex-Special Forces guys have taken to media, and they've created an interesting community of ex-military, a lot of interesting stories. And one of the common themes that you see is because of all the death and evil that they have seen, that it has sort of shattered their faith. And whether perhaps at once the righteous man had taken up the mantle to help or to fight for a cause that he felt was righteous, in the end it left him broken and shattered. And I would have to ask myself, why? Why did this happen to this person? A strong person, a person that is disciplined, that has shown perseverance, that knows how to lead, that has strength. But again, I think considering the matter of levels here, it's difficult to say exactly. But this is why at the initial reflection at the outset, after reading this chapter, I felt discomfort at the way that the way of the Lord was described, how vague it seemed to me, and at once the disappointment at my own character for thinking that I would be unable to draw any patterns from this proverb. And at another, that the possibility that the authors of this proverb did not include enough information for me to do so. So whether it is my ability or the true lack of knowable information to actually come to a reasonable conclusion about the way of the divine in our world. But I think that this is just part of the process, right? I mean, we've talked about, in the beginning, we've talked about the pattern. In the beginning is about the father and the son, or the parents and the son. There's the reference to the father and the mother and the son, and how his ways of judgment can affect his parents. Now, I can just as easily have hope that I can come to an accurate conclusion, and I could just as easily walk away from this microphone, dejected and feeling hopeless. But righteousness delivereth from death, as we have discussed. The Lord will not suffer the soul of the righteous to famish. And so I think there are a few things that we can say. At once we can say that the continual orientation towards the good and the hopeful is part of the position of the righteous. Whether or not they exactly know what to do at that moment, the first step is to believe that there is a reasonable way to solve the puzzle. He becometh poor that deal with a slack hand, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. So a slack hand is a lazy hand. Is the hand that's not quick to work or to accept responsibility. I think there's an important distinction here a distinction between what makes a man diligent and what makes him a slave to some inferior good, perhaps. Because we can identify all the ways in which being diligent, being industrious, being hardworking leads to success. I think it's undeniable what discipline and regular ritualized behavior will do to shape and to focus one's attention on the task at hand. But if the goals are poor, then I can't find a reason to believe that this diligent person, this perceived diligent person, would be rich at all. And perhaps they would achieve some form of material success, but at the expense of their soul. In order to continue in that type of environment, it's as if they punctured a hole in their soul, and throughout their working life, there's this slow seepage of what is actually valuable. And in return, what they get is the shiny riches of silver and gold, perhaps. But it is actually just a meaningless thing. Now, I think there's an even more subtle point in that if we take the modern day and we examine a few different avenues, we live in a society that is free enough where we can sacrifice our souls and still be free at the end of the day. That is to say that we go home and we are not controlled all of the time, but most of the time we are controlled. If we consider our wakeful hours, many of us work for corporations. We work for large entities that have particular goals that we could care less about. We are nominally on board with their grand vision. Now, that's not to say that there are not companies out there that are righteous companies. Certainly there are. There's a lot of variability in the American society. But as a matter of the trend, it seems as though we are moving towards the 1984 type situation. Increasing government bureaucracy, increased government corporate partnership, decreasing accountability on behalf of the elected officials. Now this is changing a little bit. People are starting to become more involved and more active. The internet and the freedom of information, I think, is helping this a lot. Many of us are restricted and burdened by student loans. That in and of itself is one of these things that is another subtle and difficult situation. There are many university programs that are offered that don't have any real-world application. And there are many university programs that have practical, real-world application. But I would argue in both situations, if the cost for that education is high enough, it doesn't matter what they offer you. They're offering you chains for which you will willingly bind yourself. And that's what makes it subtle. That's what makes it difficult. Because at once there is an evil that is chaining you, that is corrupting your soul. But at another time, at the same time, rather, the individual is accepting the evil. They're making that trade. And they think it's a righteous trade that they're sacrificing at the present for the betterment of their future, which of course is a lie. And you have the perpetuation of evil on the behalf of government that hands out loans at fairly high interest rates, and then turns around and says, we'll forgive your loans. And of course, forgiveness of that kind, that type of social responsibility, is outside of the scope of government, and they can never do so. But the continual lies is meant to give false hope. And so I say all that, and I could say much more. I could say a lot about the positive aspects too. There are certain states that conserve a little bit more of their authoritarian bent, and I think that their taxes are a bit lower. The ability to start something independently is a little bit easier. There are still many avenues that one can go for a reasonable cost for education. If one works hard, they can receive a grant, perhaps, have their education covered by some program. Of course, there are problems with that, but the military is always an option, but therein lies, of course, your sacrifice of time to serve something that I'm not quite sure is worth serving at this point. That's not to say that it's not worth saving. It certainly is worth saving. But back to the main point, we could serve that apparatus that would then provide us with some benefits so we don't have to get into the debt trap. They would pay for education and all that. There are many practical trades out there that people can learn at low cost and have a reasonable life, have a reasonable income. And so it's not all doom and gloom. But not to address a malignant cancer on a living organism, I think, is to potentially doom that organism to death. And I think that's sort of our situation. And so bringing this back to, but the hand of the diligent maketh rich. What is diligent is conditional. Because as I've said, as I started, one can be diligent for all sorts of inferior reasons. They can be as hard-working as all get out. They can be conscientious. And they can be industrious. But if it is not towards the good, the highest good, or the righteous path, then we will find ourselves in an unfortunate situation. We as a collective will find ourselves in an unfortunate situation. And so just as this diligence has requirements, so too does our political system. Our political system that allows us to be free, liberated from certain constraints by another man, let's say. But the constraints haven't gone anywhere. The righteous constraints haven't gone anywhere. Verse 5 says, He that gathereth in summer is a wise son, but he that sleepeth in harvest is a son that causeth shame. So, this similar principle here. The proverb here is planting the seed that hard work is the thing that yields fruits in the long run, while laziness this dullness to the human experience, lack of focused attention, will lead to shame. And the shame is because they have not sacrificed properly, and so they do not receive as they should. Now, what they're talking about here is a fairly simple pattern. It's not as complex as the patterns that we face today. When I say that, I mean that this pattern, although perennial and true at every stage of our experience, they are talking about food to sustain themselves. They're talking about growing their own food, a very practical life. And in this way, it's quite simple to navigate. You wake up, you sow your seed, and then you reap the harvest. These days, when a very small percentage of people actually grow the food, and probably, I think it's around 2%. On one hand, it's good, because it frees us up to do a lot of other things. In one sense, it makes it more difficult, because it's no longer a simple pattern. Now, there are many different things that we have to navigate. What it means to gather and what it means to sleep during the harvest, these two separate conditions, separate circumstances, are difficult to pinpoint. What exactly does it mean to gather in the summer these days? Is it said that we are to be sleeping if we burden ourselves with debt just to move into the world and actually attempt to reap some of the harvest that is there? Or is this a form of sleeping, even though it requires diligence and discipline to get through difficult educational experiences, to attain certain skills? I would argue that this sort of trade-off is akin to that of this sleeping person in harvest, and that person deserves shame. Now, there always will be trade-offs. That's undeniable. But there are righteous trade-offs, and there are unjust trade-offs. For we always have to sacrifice something. But it matters what we sacrifice, and it matters what we sacrifice to. There's a reason why in the Ten Commandments that we are commanded not to worship false idols. Because if we sacrifice upon the altar of a false idol, we are elevating something, and we are giving consciousness to something. We're trying to bring something down to us. That is less than the truth. That perhaps has, like many of the gods of old in the polytheistic days, are self-interested. They don't care much for the human experience. And so we make this sort of slimy, unjust trade-off with some belligerent god, some inferior celestial being, for which we believe, and we would like to think, would save us from the truth and the hard work that is required, but not just the hard work that is appropriately placed. Now, regardless of the complexity of the various economies of both the ancient and of the modern, the consequences are the same. Verse 6 says, "Blessings are upon the head of the just, but violence covereth the mouth of the wicked." So an emphasis on the importance of justice. I think our previous conjecture pointed to this importance. And exactly what is just is a fundamental definition. It's something that will save us from a lot of misplaced decisions or poor judgments. I think it'll allow us to solve a lot of the problems that we were just putting forth. What does it mean for violence to cover the mouth of the wicked? So the mouth, obviously, something that we associate with speech, something that we associate the conveying of ideas, the passing of information. If it is covered, if it is obstructed, or if it is hidden, if it is made secret, and not just hidden and made secret, and not just obstructed, but it is obstructed or hidden or made secret by something in particular. We are not just covering something with a concrete barrier. We are obstructing with violence, by some force that is intended to hurt. Now, another way we can interpret covering is to have something encapsulated in, or to be engulfed by. And so, if the mouth of the wicked is going to be spewing forth falsehood, then the threat of violence and this brutality, this damage, is going to be the thing that covers it. It's going to be the thing that is expressed. And so here we have, zooming out, we have the connection between actions and outcomes. Where on the side of the righteous, you have the alignment of your actions towards God and God's principles. And on the other hand, you have the misalignment in terms of the wicked. So, this is a little bit later in the day. I took a pause in recording. It's nighttime now. So, I'll have to regather my thoughts to a degree. I think we'll start with verse 7. The memory of the just is blessed, but the name of the wicked shall rot. You know, what's interesting here is the memory. In whose memory are we talking about here? Certainly, this implies quite a long period of time. For the memory of the just, for it to receive its blessings, it is something that has gone through trial and error. It has faced hardship. It has faced testing. And through its testing, we know it to be true. And so if we know this to be true, then we know that the just, as a group of people, however they may constitute themselves, continue and extend themselves farther into the future than that of the wicked. But the idea of this memory, and whose memory exactly? For we just established that through time we have this understanding, and through the generations we have assuredness. So whose memory? Certainly it must be our memory, and at least a part, because we have remembered all those years. We've remembered the behavior of some versus the behavior of others. And it's because that we have come to know something that we are blessed for it. That is, we have come to know something that is true. And so if we identify something rightly, we will succeed into the future. And that's what it means to be blessed. The wise heart will receive commandments, but a prating fool shall fall. He that walketh uprightly walketh surely, but he that perverteth his ways shall be known. He that winketh the eye causeth sorrow, but a prating fool shall fall. A message of confidence. Those who believe and those that have faith and that which is known have confidence. They walk upright. They're not ashamed. And just as light that covers darkness, the perverse that attempts to flip the switch on that which is known, that which is true, this will be exposed. And the same goes for lies. They cause sorrow. And again the line is repeated, but a prating fool shall fall. Now a prating fool is somebody that talks a lot, but there's very little meaning and substance within what they say. And so I come back to this thought and the idea of subtlety. The subtlety of evil, in a certain sense. You know, the analogy of a tree, I think, is very useful when thinking about the potentials for the principalities that we are considering. That is off of some base of structure and support. We can apply many different things, many different principles, I suppose, and then just sort of analyze it from there. Exactly what springs from this place. But if we are to take the more negative, the evil, and we are to represent it in this way, as a tree with its numerous branches, some branches are much larger than others. And when I think about the prating fool, my mind doesn't necessarily go immediately to wickedness or to evil. And I don't go there immediately because it is subtle. It's not as though we are being deliberately lied to. A prating fool is just somebody that doesn't think all that much. As I've said, they talk way too much without proper justification. There's not much meaning in it. They aren't deliberate. They aren't discerning. And in this way, I think laziness can be seen as a form of lie. Now, to lie is to say a falsehood, deliberately to say a falsehood. I suppose to say, if someone is wrong, it could both be a lie, but it could also be a situation in which somebody was not deliberate, but they were mistaken. And so with the subtlety of the individual, of this prating fool, perhaps it's not so much that this is something that we can consider a branch of the evil tree. It's a bit difficult. What is known comes from a single source, we can say. That which is true and that which is evil, it all comes from the same place. Now, this evil is something I think that can only exist at a level that is lower than its origin. Of course, by definition, I suppose it has to. It is the thing that tries to pull away as far as it can, away from the beacon of light. It shoots itself into the darkness in an attempt to fill itself with darkness. This sort of inherently suicidal thing. But it is a thing, so it can't necessarily kill itself. It could just rage against what created it. It can only rage against the light that it emits. It rages against itself. And I think all along the spectrum of things that have come off of this beacon, this pillar of light, they all have their own degree, their own exit velocity, if you will. Some deliberate, some not deliberate, but it doesn't really save us from the condition that we are placed under. If we are to follow that velocity analogy, it matters not so much about, well, certainly does matter, intention does matter, but in the pure base of it, even if there is no intention, that also matters. It's why somebody can be guilty of committing a crime if they didn't know what the law was. Interesting thing to see law in that way, because the only way you can really see law is if you can see beyond the thing that the incident that took place. In order to see beyond that, I want to say one must make an assumption, a reasonable assumption. Just as I make an assumption when I stand up from my chair, I won't fall on my face. Something that we hold to be so self-evident, so close to our understanding, that is something we don't really consider all too seriously. But you have to wonder about judgment and justice in this way. It seems as though, as we were discussing Plato some time ago, there is this view outward of letting our eyes illuminate the landscape. Almost as if we are sort of lost in this sea, understanding that we had come from somewhere, but we have no clues to tell us where exactly we did come from. But the picture slowly begins to form, and it is through our belief and our faith in that there is a right answer that we are able to establish stable things, stable structures. That's how we are able to move the divine principle down to the earth that's seemingly meaningless without the conscious mind. Now, I'm not sure how much substance is in that bit of thought. But we came from the idea of this gradual, like an inverted tree, where our universe is surrounding this permeation of intelligibility. And this is the image. Let's say we were looking at a painting that we're seeing. And the beacon that permeates this sphere also encompasses the sphere. So it both contains and holds it, and it also pierces through it. It has so many analogies to the darkness and the light that light comes off of this beacon like a reverse tree. Now, we were describing two different illustrations. One illustration, we were describing a moral landscape in which the farther away we get from this beacon, the less truthful we are, the less right we appear to be. And in the latter example, we were talking about, I suppose, the structure that we find ourselves in. And it's interesting that you can have both. Because if you have something that is created by a creator, and the creator also exists within, I much like the process of and the idea of free will, almost as a business owner starts his business. He sits at the top of it, making certain executive decisions, but for the most part, that business and the individuals, it's up to a lot of them to make their own decisions. And of course, higher up on the chain, the decisions have consequences that radiate down through that structure, right down to the bottom. Where at the bottom it might be something relatively simple, like delivering a package or what have you. But regardless, all the way up the chain, there is this direction and there is this meaning to it. But I think unlike the corporation and the top-downedness of the decrees, it's more like a set of rules, and there is no president, there is no CEO. Now, when I say that there is no king, right? That there is no CEO, there is no president. I don't think that's quite right either. But at the very least, we are governed by a set of laws. Our scientific exploration has thus far revealed that much to us, albeit primarily through material considerations. However, we have moved in that direction of order and of law. Now, what exactly is at the top of that hierarchy is difficult for us to say. We can barely determine exactly what the laws are. But unlike the corporation, we do not have to do as the corporation is directed. It is up to us. We are given sufficient liberty. We have freedom of will to decide. Now, with our decisions, we will observe our consequences. We will deserve the outcome. We will observe the outcomes. Now, full disclosure, I don't much like the analogy that I had just given. We're not going to try and revise it at this point, but certainly there are many holes in it. And I can feel it more than I can see it. A few more comments about verse 9. He that walketh uprightly walketh surely, but he that perverteth his ways shall be known. If I haven't said already, the low-hanging fruit here is the one, it's essentially explaining this symbol, the one that walks uprightly is the one that knows. They have, the confidence is the thing that holds them up. Now, what exactly do they know? It's difficult to say. At what level of knowing do you have confidence? There are any number of facts out there that one can know. How many of them are we required to know before we can call ourselves confident? Or are we perpetually bound to a state of poor confidence, of poor self-esteem? But therein lies the problem, the self-esteem. The self is and cannot be too much of a consideration here, because we are talking about truth, talking about things that are independent of the self. Now, the second part of this verse, but he that perverteth his ways shall be known. There's another question of level here. If we are all given this opportunity, we have all these different paths in life to walk. And of course, we don't walk them all together. We don't follow the same path. And yet, many of us come to righteousness all the same. Certainly not perfect, as we are fallen beings, but we at least improve upon our initial condition. But what can it mean? Certainly, to perverteth a path is to go off course, is to move one away from the type of understanding that would allow one to walk confidently. And this implies, or rather rejects, the presupposition that this could possibly be coming from a position of false knowing or of false confidence. We are assuming that this is the truth of true confidence. And now the perverse path will be known. And so the question is how? How does this come about? As there are millions, there are billions that are walking their own paths. It's not as though every single one of us knows that one has perverted the path of their life. It seems to be a reference to a type of understanding that is beyond the human understanding. I think this goes back to the laws that we were talking about at the head of this corporation. The darkened room that makes these laws barely legible. There are, and there is, a knowing of these laws, for they do exist. And just because we haven't shown a light on it, and just because it's beyond our conception, doesn't mean they do not exist. And so in the sense, again, that is outside of the self, this is, I think, what it is referring to, that his ways shall be known. Now, obviously, there are ways that a perverse path can be known to an individual or a group of individuals. As I've said before, actions have consequences. But again, they all come back to these laws, these constraints, necessary constraints. He that winketh with the eye causeth sorrow, but a prating fool shall fall. I think we've discussed this before. If we are deceptive, if we do other than that which we mean, we cause distress, we cause loss. For we are not moving in that path of the upright. We cannot be confident in what is known if what is intended is hidden from us. Not only do we have to worry about the rightness of our interactions, but we also have to worry about the wickedness of another who may attempt to pervert our paths. The mouth of a righteous man is a well of life, but violence covereth the mouth of the wicked. Hatred stirreth up strifes, but love covereth all sins. Now, what exactly does it mean to hate? Certainly many words that we use, we can throw around. We can fill them up with meaning, or we can fill them up with just enough to allow them to slip past our lips. But let's say we are referring to the case in which we have filled this word up to the brim of meaning, and we actually mean it when we say that we hate something. So again, I ask the question, what does it mean to hate something? A standard dictionary definition is an intense dislike or ill will. Okay, an intense dislike or ill will. Now, our will is something that we have mentioned. It implies individualism. It implies agency to the self. Now, ill is something that we can consider to be a sickness, an attempt at corruption of that of the healthy state, to turn down the feelings of positivity And so to the degree that we are allowed, or I should say, to the degree that we should exercise our individuality, when it becomes infected by the negative, when it becomes saturated with the more detestable emotions, when it is accompanied by perhaps a judgment that we feel confident in, a judgment that leads us to the conclusion of this negativity. And the conclusion of this negativity is the key that fits into that lock that opens the door that leads to this outpouring of negative emotion. And so I think there's two paths, as there always are. The one of truthfulness and the one of self-deception, or just deception in general, where we can hate something because we are deceived into thinking something, that the key that opened our door really didn't open our door or unlock anything. It fooled us into opening the door for it. And then there's the other, that actually fit into that lock and opened the door truthfully. Now, exactly what that means is difficult to say. Perhaps it's the sin of the self for allowing the feelings to be let loose instead of standing uprightly in that doorway and confronting that which is tempting us to hate. But we really haven't yet described what hate is. We've described how it can find us, truthfully or deceitfully. We've described that it involves us. It involves the self. We described that it involves a degree of negative emotion. So let's turn our focus to what is actually at our doorstep. The thing that tempts us to hate. The thing that tempts us into this intense dislike, as the definition says, or ill will. It's a choice after all. It is our will. Whether we let this thing in is the thing that we are confronting when we open the door, hate itself. And so what is our relationship then to this hate? It is up to us, isn't it? It is our will whether or not we invite it in. And let's say for a moment that we actually invite this hate in. This is the point, I suppose, that we become ill, we become infected. But it is by our will, by our choice, that we become infected. It covers us, just like an illness. Nowhere we can stamp it out like an annoying insect that is buzzing about our ears. It is seemingly permeates all of us. We could feel it, we can sense it, but in no way can we liberate ourselves from it. But of course that's not true. We have antibodies. There is a way about the setting of the sun and the rising, this reset and reorientation, that over time heals us of our illnesses, or leads to further depravity, perhaps, to further illness. But then there's the other. There's the will. For we don't always have to invite or walk to our door when the stranger appears. We can send out an invitation and open our door to those that are invited. And that is the second part of this verse. But love covereth all sins. Now covers, we can say that it means hide. But I think that there is a better way to interpret it. Because it's not as though we are brushing our sins under the carpet. It's covered in the sense that it holds it. It keeps it from further destruction. Love covers it with itself. And in so doing, just like in the immune system to a virus, it'll attack and destroy it. It'll come in and it will solve the dispute that we had with the other fellow that we invited in earlier, that of hate. It will politely ask him to leave. In the lips of him that has understanding, wisdom is found. But a rod is for the back of him that is void of understanding. Wise men lay up knowledge, but the mouth of the foolish is near destruction. Now knowledge is that which permeates the unknown. There's a light into the darkness. In this mouth of the foolish, we say destruction. We are saying something that undoes the progress that has been made towards the intelligible. It is the wool that covers the eyes. It is the dullness that comes over the mind. Now this can be a person that comes to us, just as it can be the forces at be in our own experience. That which tempts us away, that which perverts our attention. The rich man's wealth is his strong city. The destruction of the poor is their poverty. I think an important thing here to remember is that much of this has a lot of practical experience. We are reading an account from those ancient peoples that have lived through war, death, and destruction. But this applies as much to your own heart as it does to some ancient city or to some modern city. The rich man's wealth is his strong city. A strong city is more than just a defensible city. It is more than something that is able to stand on its own in a otherwise unknown environment. It is a home for those that live in it. It is full of stable relations. Of course, there have been no utopian cities, and it's hard to imagine that there will come a time when there will be one. But we will always approach, and we can always make better that which we have at present. And we hope and pray for the day that we come to we come to the glorious city. But the rich man's wealth is his strong city. It's a city of culture and of art. And this culture and this art, it permeates everything. It permeates our discourse, it permeates the narrative that we tell ourselves. It allows us to be more active participants in our story. A strong city is a hopeful city. One that is after the good, one that is after something that is true. And out of all the things that could possibly be true, we are after the things that are true that improve us. Not just our material condition, but all the things that really matter to us. About the love that we have in our hearts, and the ways in which we are able to defend ourselves against evil. Now I realize that this interpretation is not quite consistent with the second half of the verse. The destruction of the poor is their poverty. Now there is a way in which we can make it consistent. But there's also a way of interpreting the first part of that, in which we would think of the rich man as blinded by his own wealth, and therefore doesn't tend to the poor. And because of their lack of attentiveness to those that are in need, that which has caused poverty, that which has caused material poverty, poverty of mind, poverty of ability, of wanting, the poverty of, and when I say poverty of wanting, I don't necessarily mean of wanting for food. It's of wanting of that which is greater. Certainly there are many in our day that are in a state of poverty because of this lack of wanting. There's a fundamental hole in the core of their being. Perhaps they want more than anything else to know what to want. But in that condition there is a lack of truly wanting, and to be after that which is fulfilling, truly fulfilling. There are many in a state of poverty that have tried to dull that painful question, the painful burden, through drugs, through a life of prostitution. These are all the things that are involved in the poor and of the poverty. The mind that is stricken with doubt and uncertainty to such a degree that allows him to, I shouldn't say that allows him, but that tempts him into a path that is poorly suited to suit his needs, to fit his needs. And so I think that there's two things to be said here about this verse. On one hand, a strong city, I think, has all of those characteristics that I described, but it won't remain strong for long if the poor are not integrated properly into that society, if they are not helped by those that have the ability, those that have the riches, both materially and non-corporeally, let's say. The labor of the righteous tends to life, the fruit of the wicked to sin. And so we can see all the things that one must value that tends towards life. That of family rearing, that which is life, that which is living. You can have something that is living but in a poor state. Certainly we wouldn't want that type of living for us. So it's beyond just the state of life and death. It also involves the quality of life and living, and all the things that are required therein. Now, sin is a very large term in my mind. It encompasses a lot of different things. But just like the wicked and that of evil, sin is something. Sin is, in the human context, perhaps it's an action, it's a behavior. It is anything that tempts us away from that which is. And just as there are many deliberate sins, there are unknown sins, sins committed without the intention. And this shouldn't get us down, because there always is a way of forgiveness and of grace. He is in the way of life that keeps instruction, but he that refuses reproof errs, or erreth, or makes error. And so I'm reminded of a time in my life where I had to learn, stay quiet, do what I'm told, pay attention, try your best not to make mistakes, but also when you do make mistakes, own up to it and learn from it. This instruction is the thing that guides you on the right path. For the blank slate is the individual that is prone to make all the mistakes that those before them have made, and they are bound to they're bound to enter into a state of repetition that could be avoided if we just listen to the instruction. And it's okay to have questions. Question the validity of the instruction. For the better the answer, the better we will adhere to that instruction. He that hides hatred with lying lips, and he that uttereth a slander is a fool. Now what's important here is equivalencies, because there will be a point when we express doubt, when we feel as though the path that we are on no longer makes any sense, and we have to return to principles that are fundamental to allow us to reorient ourselves back onto the path of righteousness. And so exactly what do I mean by these equivalencies? Well, we may say to ourselves certain things. We may say, don't be the fool, be the righteous person, be wise, be of understanding. And we may repeat these words to ourselves as a mantra every day. But unless there is a deliberate process to understand exactly what we mean by those terms, over time, just like a battery loses its charge, we will lose the meaning of the word. And so I think that it is as important to go through the process of, we can call it prayer, serious prayer, which has to do with the unfolding of something, and the unfolding in a way that is oriented and directly focused at God, at the highest. We can also do this between individuals. We can enter into a dialogue that circles down into a depth that approaches the vulnerabilities of the heart, a depth that opens up the creativity of the mind. And so again, back to this equivalency. He that hideth hatred with lying lips, and he that uttereth a slander is a fool. So when we say that a person is a fool, or if we are being self-critical when we say that we are being a fool, we should remember the verse 18, and we should think, he that hideth hatred with lying lips. Now what does it mean to hide hatred with lying lips? We just got finished with an illustration of hatred that knocks at the door of our home. This home, of course, is in our mind. It is in our consciousness. And we spent some time trying to figure out exactly what this hatred is. We used the handy Google Dictionary definition of ill will, and we related it to the broader aspect of the will. This will of ours is something of a choice. It is something of a freedom. It is a liberty that we are endowed with by our Creator. And there are many different ways in which this will of ours can be perverted, in the sense that it could be disrupted. Our heads can be turned in any particular direction to look at any particular thing. It involves the orientation of attention. In some sense, it is a deeply rooted thing, belief. It's a pull. It's a conscious decision. And to have this will polluted, to have it corrupted by something that would have it believe the more negative elements of our existence, accompanied by the naivety of the heart and the passion of the emotions. This is a recipe for hate. And so what we see in verse 18 is a man that hides it. He hides his hatred. He lies about it. And what's worse, he uttereth a slander, which is an untrue statement about somebody, perhaps an attack against someone's character, a wrongful attack. This person is a fool. And I think through that process, through that internal dialogue, we can come to understand exactly what hatred means in the broader context. You know, I was listening to, this may sound strange, but perhaps I should rephrase it and say I heard a Taylor Swift song. It had to do with karma. And the lyrics in it had to do with praising karma as a god. And just as if we were to think of hatred as some independent deity, it would be very difficult to make sense of our place in the world. It would be a very selfish existence to imagine that all of these celestial beings that we can experience, the one that is wound up in hatred, is something for itself and by itself, rather than something that exists within a broader whole. But this broader whole is really not a diffuse whole. It has a direction and it has a purpose to it. There is a right and wrong. And so just as in the case of Taylor Swift's bizarre worship of karma, and that of hatred, it is in some sense, the sacrifice of a certain degree of value within ourselves that we can appreciate how this connects to God, how it connects to the divine logos. Because without this connection, all of our hatreds, our ill will, our will in general, is nothing more than a self-interested expression. In the multitude of words, there wants not sin, but he that refrains his lips is wise. Now this may be one of my favorite verses out of this chapter. In the multitude of words, our words are little packages of information, of meaningful information, that we can use to converse with ourselves and also between individuals. There are many words. Some words have a greater meaning in them than others. The words in and of themselves are not the things that are responsible for the direction of their form, let's say. They don't have an individual agency. It is up to the agents to use these words to transmit information in the way that they see fit. And so within the multitude, if we are to take every word in existence and throw it up, and we are to see it floating about, there's no intelligible thing that forms without the conscious connection, whether it be divine or human. And as such, there's nothing within that multitude that tends towards sin. There's also nothing that tends towards good either. But he that refrains his lips is wise. To refrain is to keep back. It is to hold it. Perhaps to hold it against some urge. To hold it against some feeling. To hold it against, again, the naivety of the heart. And I think the heart can be another analogy here. The heart is something that is akin to the multitude of words. It is endowed with much meaning. It gives our subjective experience weight for what would be sorrow or happiness without the feelings that are associated with them. Similarly, what would words be without meaning? Value must come to us in some way. And so I say that to suggest that this refrain, as it is with the pliability, the malleability of the heart and that of words, we don't just take a substance that is poor of form and throw it out into the world and say, this is what I want people to see. This is what I want people to think, what I mean. Because the form is nothing special to look at. It is purposeless, it's meaningless, it's a blob of nothing. It's a ball of Play-Doh that hasn't been formed or shaped into anything of value. And so to refrain, I think, is to take care and to carefully mold this piece of Play-Doh or this ball of wax, whatever we want to call it, until it is something that is worth something. This is followed by the verse, "The tongue of the just is as choice silver. The heart of the wicked is little worth." Now this verse follows beautifully from 19. Because off of this refrain we also understand that the tongue of the just, that which is right, that which can make an appropriate judgment based on various accounts. They're able to be discerning individuals that allows them to appropriately attach a relevant account to a true judgment. And the tongue of these people, the thing that manipulates sounds in order to produce the words that have meaning, is as choice silver. It is as valuable as the things that perhaps in their day they felt were of very high value, of choice silver. And so in the context of this refrain, remember that we have held back what we want to say because of our condition. We can say because of the multitude of things that are out there. It requires the conscious mind and the direction of the conscious mind to bring even the things that are designed and are full of meaning, like our feelings and our words. It requires care. And if we are truly going to be just, I think that this care and this deliberation, this discernment, all goes into the form of what we consider to be just. And the resulting tongue and the manipulation therein of that multitude, the sort of the reaching up and grasping of that ether, whether it be a handful of feelings or a handful of words that we bring into ourselves to chew on and to form, to manipulate by our tongue. This is valuable. On the other hand, the heart of the wicked is little worth. What is the heart of the wicked? Well, it's the reverse. It is the reverse of the one that refrains, so that they may deliberate on the multitude to put things together for the purposes of good. That which is wicked does the opposite. They may refrain, but they take from the multitude to do poor and to do evil, to distract and to pervert, instead of to unify and to discover. The lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for want of wisdom. Again, remembering what the fool is, he that hides hatred with lying lips, and uttereth a slander. These are the people that perhaps do such things. They desire wisdom, but the road and the path that they are on makes it utterly impossible for them to reach wisdom. The lips of the righteous feed many. Now this feeding I think has a double meaning. The feeding is at once metaphorical as it is literal, because I think that the righteous in terms of behavior, given time, given practice, and given discipline, especially considering the ancient world and the increased probability for famine compared to our modern day, although not a complete impossibility. Being diligent and paying attention was the difference between having enough food and starving. And so in this way, the righteous, those which stand up tall, that are confident in their way, and that confidence allows them to handle the burdens of their existence in a way that they are able to pay attention on the things that truly matter, and they are not polluted by the multitude of things that distract. They pay attention, they plant their crop, and they reap the harvest. And this is also metaphorical, because feed implies a nourishing, and of the human experience there is not just the nourishment of the stomach or of the body, there is the nourishment of the mind and the heavenly principle that comes down into it. And I think the righteous, just as those that are diligent in producing material substance for the maintenance of the body, do the same with that of understanding, of learning, and of achieving a state of wisdom. The blessing of the Lord, it maketh rich, and he addeth no sorrow with it. And unlike our Taylor Swift example, where this karma is worshipped because of the karma is worshipped in the song because of the benefits that it brings. There is this idea of, if I do good, I will receive good, and those that do bad will receive bad, which in and of itself I don't think that there is much of an argument, at least I don't have much of an argument with. The argument comes in when it is placed within the self, and that is it. That the self enriches, and that the receiving of this karma is because of the karma in and of itself. That it is not part of a broader conscious thing, of a more divine principle, that is God, that is directed more than just the pattern of karma. It's as though we imagine driving in a car, but we don't imagine point A, and we don't imagine point B. We just think about the movement of us in that car. But without the point A, and without perhaps in this example it would be without point A. We just think about the movement of the car and point B. We don't think about point A, where it originates from. And if we don't think about where it originates from, I think we would be tempted to say that it's point B to point B, that it is circular, that we embark on a journey to do good just so that we could return to the self and praise the self. We are allowed to do this journey because of karma, the journey itself. It's the Ionian, everything is in motion. It's hard for one to find any truth in that sort of philosophy. And so I say that because the thing that provides us with good is God. God is the thing that makes us rich. And we may believe in karma. We may take it through its journey. But if it's not connected to the source, or the thing that allows it to be, then we are seriously impoverished. Our blessings will be limited. Our blessings will be limited to self-satisfaction. Our blessings in this way are not blessings at all. To be absorbed in the self is to be blind. It is to be a fool. It is to hide oneself within the ego. It is to secretly hate your neighbor, or to hope that they do not do as well as you because they do not believe in good as you do. Verse 23, it is as sport to a fool to do mischief, but a man of understanding has wisdom. This is another verse that I think relates to this karma Taylor Swift example. For sport, we play for entertainment. What we gain or what we lose is insignificant, which in and of itself is fine to pass some of the time, to enjoy ourselves in something that is competitive. I think the saving grace of sport is that it brings the people that participate together, even the people that sit on the sidelines and watch. It brings them together. It allows them to participate in something together. That in and of itself, I think, perhaps is a good thing. However, if it is done just for itself, or if it is done for mischief, to deceive, or to lumber about the night in hopes to expand that egotistical drive to steal from one another, from somebody else, in order that they may feel that they have increased their worth and their standing by having some object that is of superficial value, or to sow discord. This is the sport of the fool, a game for which there is no unity, but a man of understanding has wisdom. And this understanding, in the context of this verse, has to do with understanding of what is right and what is wrong, understanding consequences, understanding purpose of one's steps, understanding the orientation of one's gaze. The fear of the wicked, it shall come upon him, but the desire of the righteous shall be granted. That there is always something, that there is a law, a universal constant that is set in motion by its creator, that keeps things the way that they ought to be. Now, one of the major projects of becoming, I think, a Christian or a Jew, a religious Jew, is to understand how this entity, supreme entity, acts in the world, because certainly there are many reasons why we can think and believe that there is no such force in our reality, because of the harshness of the environment that we find ourselves in. As the whirlwind passeth, so is the wicked no more, but the righteous is an everlasting foundation. Really a beautiful image. Now, there have been many storms throughout my life, and I mean storms that are related to the weather. And it's always, I found it to be a comforting thing when a strong storm approaches, or when a storm is raging. And I'm not really sure why that is. I don't think I had any particular premonition or thought of this verse, or of what it would mean for the wicked to be caught up in such a vicious whirlwind, while the righteous are rooted firmly in the earth. But that's just it. It is when troubles come, and there are many troubles that plague us. Just got off of talking about all of the terrible things that plague us in our world, whether it be slavery, sexual coercion, manipulation, fraud, deception, evil, all the usual suspects. It's comforting to know that in a strong whirlwind that they would be disposed of, but comfort is not really what we are after. We are after concreteness. And so we are not to satisfy ourselves with the suggestion. We are to take it upon ourselves to use the suggestion in real-world terms and examples. We are to listen to the advice that it brings. But again, just like prayer, we cannot stop at the surface. And so we must ask ourselves, why is it the case that the wicked are so superficial? Why are they not rooted to the earth? And I say the earth because the whirlwind and the imagery that this produces is, in my mind, that of a storm. So again, what makes the wicked so superficial? Why are their foundations so weak? What is a foundation? What makes a foundation strong? The foundation is a base of something. A base, I think of a construction example, I think of a basement of poured concrete. Within that concrete are fixed, perhaps steel beams to support the structure that is going to be built. A house, for example. And it's this foundation that supports the rest of the elements that are going to come after. And this support of all of the elements are the thing, I think, is the thing that leads to emergence. I use this example all the time. The elements of the house that then leads to the production of what we consider to be the home, which involves this place of security and of safety and of love and of connection, of family. All of this would be difficult without a strong foundation. Now, what is the foundation for man? The foundation is the divine Logos. It is the thing that exists beyond ourselves, that is the foundation of knowing. It is the foundation of being. And from that source, from that stable source, that stable foundation, just as that concrete is poured in the basement, that has the steel beams affixed in it, this divine Logos gives us a place to root the conscious element, the heavenly principle. And from that root, from that sort of, that plug-in, we are able to connect to such a profound meaning and a profound purpose that it matters not the evils of the world. When you're in your home with your family, safe, the thunderstorm has little effect on us. If we have a very sturdy home, it can survive any sort of natural disaster. As the whirlwind passeth, so is the wicked no more. But the righteous is an everlasting foundation. As vinegar to the teeth, and as smoke to the eyes, so is the sluggard to them that send him. Vinegar, a highly acidic substance, erodes the enamel around the tooth, or that protective layer, protective covering. The tooth in and of itself, a vital component of our consuming food. Smoke, something that irritates the eyes, causes us to close the eyes, to blink. The eyes water. It makes it more difficult to see, both because of the pain that it causes the eyes and also the obscurity of the environment. Obscuring of the environment, I should say. And so in the same way that a substance may erode the thing that protects, a substance that erodes something that is vitally important to us, or something that blinds us, obstructs our vision. The sluggard, this laziness, this slowness, is the same that erodes those teeth. It is the same that takes away from the vital component. It is the same as the one that blinds the eyes. The fear of the Lord prolongeth days, but the years of the wicked shall be shortened. The hope of the righteous shall be gladness, but the expectation of the wicked shall perish. The way of the Lord is strength to the upright, but his destruction shall be to the workers of iniquity. The righteous shall never be removed, but the wicked shall not inhabit the earth. The mouth of the just brings forth wisdom, but the froward tongue shall be cut out. The lips of the righteous know what is acceptable, but the mouth of the wicked speaketh frowardness. So these remainder of these verses are all, they have a similar cadence, similar warning. We see that the wicked's existence is temporary. We see that the just and the righteous are of stable character, They are not to be moved. They are the ones that know what is acceptable. This concludes Proverbs chapter 10. We'll begin next time with Proverbs chapter 11.